Welcome to conversation number 6, the last conversation in the series, Echo Effect Conversations on War and Environment. I'm really happy that today we have both our speakers, Ali Akbar, Mehta, and Colin Greer. Hello and welcome.
Hello.
It's been a couple of sessions where one or the other couldn't make it, but we're all here today. And we also have our guest, Irina Kruzhilina. And today's session title is Children Refugee Futures. What's the most urgent question? And we want to welcome everyone who is joining. You're welcome to also write where you're joining us from. Last session we had people from numerous places, and it was interesting to see how far and how close these conversations are reaching. Today we're based in Finland, in the US, and in India, so we're connecting from different time zones too. And I want to still, because there's always someone new to this conversation, so I want to explain a little bit what Echo Effect is as a series and how it came to be, and who is Artists with Evidence, the organization are curating and moderating and organizing these conversations. So Echo Effect came to be from thinking of a collaboration between Ali Akbar Mehta and Colin Greer. And we started talking about like how we could kind of recombine their own artistic practice and works, and then taking a look at it through using possibly AI and seeing how incredible archive that is in Ali's work could be recombined with Colin's poetry. And this archive is very much focused on violence. And the interesting aspect that I always like to highlight is that you can't understand violence without peace. So there needs to be a spectrum. And that's where we kind of started dwelling. And then before this even became a project or a collaboration that we're still kind of trying to implement, we started having conversations. And this led to the idea of inviting guests into the conversations that we were having, kind of our daily type of Zooms. So we applied for funding from the Nordic Culture Fund, and they gave the Globus Upstart grant to Artists with Evidence. And this is why we got to this series of conversations that we have today, our last one. And without going into a lot of detail, you can also look up Artists with Evidence. We are an organization that is very much focused on art science, and in bringing these issues to the table, we want these conversations to have a ripple effect so that more people talk about the topics that we've been talking about, and that eventually they can also like take action into these topics that we're approaching. So today, I would like to start by introducing Irina Kruzhilina. I'll just say brief words and then kind of pass the floor to you. Irina is a New York-based award-winning director, scenographer, visual dramaturg, experienced designer, and educator. And she's been creating work at the intersection of visual art, live performance, and civic engagement. So welcome, Irina, and thank you for joining us today for this session. Your work has been spanning from an incredible range. So you've had public installations addressing environmental issues, and your most recent project that we'll be diving a bit into, SpaceBridge, that focuses on refugee children and its intersection with intercultural exchange. So, and I think we have also in the chat the link to the project. So feel free to check it also later. When we had a couple of conversations before today, one thing that struck me was how you were describing how your focus had evolved or changed or in a way fine-tuned, and to be centered towards people and not, it's not just about an environmental issue or something else, it's about people. And so that's why the title of this conversation is really what's the most urgent question. And so I would welcome you to tell a little bit about yourself and how this journey has brought you to the work that you're doing today.
Thank you so much for the intro and for inviting me. It's such an honor to be here with you, and especially in the last session. So I'm really grateful for that. Yeah, it's a wonderful introduction which you gave me, because I do consider myself as a multidisciplinary artist, as a slasher actually, because I do so many things, including teaching and I even do yoga teaching sometimes. And I think that in this life, it's always about what do we focus at the moment. And I actually started in theater as a designer and have been designing for a long time and had a very successful design career with, some highlights. And largest parade in Tokyo Disney, and worked with some of the greatest directors in the world as well, and was doing a lot of environmental performances. But at some point, I really pivoted my work towards being a generative artist and not supportive artist. And at the moment, in the last 5 years, my work really is centered around two forms. Site-specific public work, and by site-specific, I mean creating work outside of any conventional theater or cultural building, and also socially engaged performances, which I create often with community, for community, and in the last several years, especially with youth. And, in these years, especially in the last years, my work was really centered about finding cross-cultural exchange. My mom was born in Ukraine. My father is a Georgian Jew, and I was born in Moscow, and I live in New York. So for me, all the cultures, very complicated cultures, which are right now inside my identity, are really, mirrored in some of the issues which I'm exploring in my work. And the last almost 3 years, which is scary to say, since the Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it is 1,002 days as today. Been extremely difficult, especially because where I come from, with my mom was born in one country, and the country where I was born, started a war with the country where my mom was born. So my focus really shifted 2.5 years ago towards supporting first Ukrainian artists, Ukrainian playwrights, and creating work with them, and then also reflected in the project, which we will chat today about in depth, with working with Russian refugee children who came to America because of their parents' anti-war stance, and many of them came through Mexican border and now live in the shelters. So it's really a pivot from, like you're saying, working with just issues and things and more conceptual themes, to working with people and centering people in my ongoing work, especially since the start of the war.
Yeah, and of course, it would be great to discuss these challenges faced by refugee children. We got discrimination, cultural shocks, systemic barriers. So maybe I would throw a question at you. So how do you see that these refugee children's challenges intersect with this societal perception of them as the future of communities, of society, this idea of children being the future?
I think it also depends where the refugees are from, right? Which is, again, another very complicated issue, especially being in the West and being in the States. when we talk about, the project which I'm creating right now, these are the kids which come from the country which is an aggressive country, right, with a government which is criminal. And when I noticed that a lot of them started coming here since the start of the war, I connected to them, and many of them are severely bullied in schools. Because they're born in the wrong place and the wrong time. So they're facing different issues from other refugees. Although I can't say that we're welcoming any refugees in America, especially now. So thinking about what their future is and how we can help them, I think the most important thing is to help them adapt in this country, which is quite hostile towards them now. So in this project, my goal was not only to create space where they can process their feelings, but really connect them to the locals. So in the project, I brought 11 Russian refugee kids together with 8 American kids. And it became about the cross-cultural exchange, and also because it was a workshop program in the beginning, I allowed them to imagine and build a model of the future and how they see the future of this planet, the future of the politics, and which role we can play in their future. And in the world where friendships like those between them, which they really bonded over time, can be supported. So when we're thinking about refugees in the future, I think our job is actually to create the environment and creative space for them, and then back off a bit and listen to them.
Yeah.
And really,
I'm curious.
focus.
I think that even before we hear a little bit from Ali and Colin, we usually prepare a couple of polls so that we can also, in a way, hear a little bit of what our participants are thinking. So we're going to throw this first poll. What do you think is the most significant barrier for refugee children adapting to a new country? And you need to choose the most significant. So it's always a tough choice, but we got 1, language; 2, discrimination; 3, lack of resources; 4, cultural differences. Interesting. We started off with discrimination as a kind of 100% of the answers, but we'll wait a little bit if everyone can respond. And this is something that both you and Ali and Colin can also comment on, like what would you say, in your opinion, for example, is the most significant barrier?
Do you want to open it up to us?
Yeah, maybe I'll just share the results first. I think
Okay.
we're good to share them. So I'll end the poll and I can share with everyone. So we still got this discrimination kind of in the top, and then both lack of resources and cultural differences as other possibilities. So, but please go ahead and say.
I just wanted to say that listening to Irina, it's clear to me. It's been clear since I've understood her work, and I used to do research in the field of immigration, that we are pretty much faced with the choice of promoting the transgenerational transmission of trauma or the transgenerational transmission of goodwill. Both spread across generations and repeat themselves, and we have to invest in one in opposition to the other. That's how I understand it. And there's a concept that I take from a British psychiatrist, but not his theory, but just the terminology, the holding environment. We are in the business of weaving a holding environment that allows for the inclusion of enormous differences. But very often we what I like to call a malignant bonding that stands in opposition to a wholesome holding environment. People long to belong, and often they belong through their hatreds rather than their affections. We're seeing that played out in the United States right now and around the world, I guess. So I think it's critical that we invest in goodwill, and building communities of goodwill is critical, and building communities of goodwill amongst refugee and immigrant and other subaltern communities is critical, so that we don't breed, both because it's humane to do it, but also so we don't breed generational hatred.
Yeah, and really explore this philosophy that people and not systems are the most vital resource, right, that we have in surviving this displacement also.
But there are people who build systems, and they have an investment often in the malignity of those systems.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and just throwing the ball back to Irina, like, how do you think that this kind of public and collaborative art can improve this marginalized groups to reclaim their narratives in these new environments that they get to?
Yeah, I think that public art, I mean, first of all, public art is accessible to people. Unlike, you know, in the States, any theaters or cultural institutions are quite exclusive. And even, you know, by exclusivity, I don't necessarily mean just the ticket price. There are institutions which can allow for cheaper prices, but if you go to downtown theater in New York, for example, or any cultural institutions, it will be one group of people, one group of audience. There is very little mixture. And sometimes I just don't even know why we're doing it. It's like we're creating performances for performance liberal people, and that's it. And I think these are not really the people for who this project should be created. Take it, you know, take it to the South. And good luck to you with that, right? Like, so when we look often on our audiences, they're very, very cool liberal New Yorkers living, you know, in the village of Brooklyn and reading New York Times. And when you create public art, I think this is where the mixture really happens, and this is where the vital dialogue can happen, and dialogue among strangers can happen. And I think the more places we create where we can have and generate dialogue across the differences and across people who would not find themselves in the same place, right? So we need to build those places for people which have very little in common in order to move the society forward. Right now, you know, with elections, it's like, what do we do? And sometimes I think, okay, just come off your high horse and figure out how to connect, which is really difficult because we're all pissed off and scared and feel, you know, feel betrayed. But I think we need to figure out what the connection means. And the public art is really, and public spaces is really a place to do it, because if we can create environments, creative environments where people can feel free to express themselves. I've done a few projects, like one of the projects we did right at the end of the pandemic, A Dozen Dreams. It was, you know, in a massive mall inside one of the buildings of World Trade Center, and it was an art project, but then which was based on 12 playwrights, and we created their little plays into environments, and people will walk through this. But the most important part of this was that we created the 13th environment right at the center of the public space. And the whole piece was about what people dreamed about and what these playwrights dreamed about, you know, at the time of pandemic and Black Lives Matter movement. And in a certain room, we called it the Wall of Dreams. And we invited everyone who was in the space to write what they were dreaming about. And we did not know how successful it would be, especially, you know, people. Vaccines just showed up. And we just kept cleaning the wall because people really wanted to go to the wall and write. And it became this hotspot, like, you know, it was a place to pop the question. There will be like marriage proposals in New York going there. And there was this little boy, maybe 5 years old, who like tried, we had a bucket with a chalk, and he really tried to reach to the bucket to pick the chalk, but he was too short and he really wanted to write his dream. And you just look at this wall of dreams from people from all walks of life, but you understand that what they dream about are actually pretty much the same. You know, we dream of the same things, but we really focus only on things which make us really different from one another and not the same. So, you know, as an artist, I need to figure out how I can provide tools for people to to come to this meaningful conclusion and connect rather than disconnect.
And it's really about taking over, in a way, the public space, but also this collaborative aspect of the work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think thinking of in creating these spaces, I would like to throw a question to Colin. Like, what role do you think that these humanist ideals that you so much bring into our conversations, what role do these humanist ideals play in creating spaces like SpaceBridge or like the one that Irina just described, that foster this understanding and connection across cultural divides?
You know, to talk about a humanistic ideal is in a sense to drift into a kind of interesting world of philosophy. But in real life, a humanistic ideal is seeing the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas had a phrase he used that I think is appropriate. It's called primordial mutuality. We have a basic connection to each other, which we spend a lot of time denying, because, as Irina says, we emphasize our differences. But those differences are often socially constructed. They aren't necessarily meaningful to a child, for example, but they get socially constructed, and they generate enormous amounts of hatred. So for me, humanism is about contesting the hatred, for building bridges of humanity. And I would say that public space is critical here, but it's inside and outside. So the public space that Irina is talking about is external space, which is critical because people need to occupy physical space together. But at the same time, there is an internal public space, which is who do you let into your dream? Who do you let into your vision of humanity? And in what we readily hide behind, the liberal ideal, I'm not quite sure what that is anymore, but hiding behind it, we tend not to understand how big the ask is we make of other people. So I'm struck this week by this absurd, I think, congresswoman in America who wants to exclude a transgender woman from bathrooms, and wants to make that a national policy in all federal buildings. Well, when you think about that, that is a kind of bizarre exclusionism that makes so little sense for both the size of the population we're talking about, but also it's a reminder that we need to figure out how to understand that for a woman like that, and for the people she represents, there's an ask we're making that's too much for her. And that's true in so many instances of what we've called human progress, that we ask people to adapt to a new idea. And because we haven't taken enough time to include them in the exercise of the idea, there is a rejection because their lack of comfort with it gets triggered by some other serious problem. So give me a quick example, and I'll quiet down. But if you think about 50 years ago, mixed race was anathema in America. Mixed race relationships. They are no longer so. Hopefully that will remain the case. They are no longer so, which meant a huge adaptation of cultural behavior, which people met. And it led to a period of great hopefulness of what can happen between humans. And then the world debt economy produced this thing called austerity and robbed working people of a decent living. And robbed of a decent living, it became very hard for cultures of men in particular, but of families led by men in particular, to actually absorb the changes that were being made because too much was being taken from them at once. They couldn't earn a living. They couldn't feel dignified in their own place. Their country was going to war all over the place and losing, and their sense of personal dignity was diminished. And both the ask we make of those people and the diminishment of their dignity has to be part of our public engagement. We have to really be able to embrace their pain as well as asking them to join in the repair of other people's pain. And we haven't mastered that. I'm not even sure we've asked the question right, but that feels to me like the critical, humane action perspective, and it requires an internal and external point of view about public space.
Definitely. Yeah, I would from that and thinking about like how this engagement can be done, I'm thinking a bit about SpaceBridge still and how this artistic engagement. And Irina, do you think that this artistic engagement could become like a model, a global model for integrating refugee populations? Is this something that you're aiming with your work, or is it, or are we talking more, are we talking about a pilot or an experiment, or how do you see this?
Yeah, thank you for asking. We're definitely talking about the pilot, because the whole vision for SpaceBridge is to connect the local population, locally born population, to the refugees, and especially to those who, who are not welcomed in this country because of their governments or because of some political climate at the moment. And so this is what I now call SpaceBridge New York, because it's such a successful experiment. And again, when we started, we didn't think that would be performance. I just wanted to start some kind of a workshop program and a space, external and internal place for people, for the kids to be and connect. And from that, we shared some work with the audience, and then went to rehearsals and so on. And the workshop itself, which I've created, it's based on both visual art and theater tools. Kids love making things, and it's something what Colin mentioned. Like, kids have a very right actually idea of life, right? Like, they see things for what they are, and they like making things. And we stop seeing things as they are, and we stop making things. And I think if we all started making things again, we know how to do it. Maybe the world would be better. So we allowed them for space to share their stories, to process their stories, and to make the model of the world together. And that workshop program itself is very replicatable. It's just, it's 10 sessions. At the end, you have 20 friends. So when we talk about like, what is the success, to me, this is a success, right? And as one of the experiments I had, the American kids write letters of support to the court about their Russian friends, because the refugees will all have asylum court hearings coming in the next 2 years. And so they wrote why this 10-year-old needs to stay in the country. And it was really, really touching. And then they read those letters, to the audience. And as adult audiences sit and they, and listen to the reasons, right? Why the kid needs to stay. And one of the reasons, because they have a friend. And there is definitely this ripple effect, because I think that what happened with this workshop, again, before even the performance, is what happened to the American kids and how they transformed their opinion about refugees. And then they will bring it home and they will talk to their parents about that, and the parents will talk to neighbors and so on. So just thinking about the impact overall is very powerful. So my hope is to first create these workshop programs around the US, but also around the world, where I can, I'm thinking what would be the population in Germany, right? It would be interesting to bring, German youth and Syrian youth together in the same room, right? Or thinking about the countries like Hungary, where the refugees, they don't even talk about this problem there, right? So thinking about those cultures and how we can bring that workshop program. And then from those workshops, we can also create a performance for the larger audience. But to me, again, it's the process of making theater and building friendships, which is more important than being on stage, although they love being on stage in front of, 200 people who really adore them. But there are these steps, right? And each of the step is possible with different youth and different refugee youth and local
to replicate youth. and have different outcomes too, because I think they would bring, I think what are the ages like that this
Yeah,
with
between 10 and 15. So it's a wide range actually, but everything what's in the performance really came from the kids, right? So I just prompted them and they will bring stories and they will edit it, but they're definitely the co-authors. And I think that working in other countries is also interesting because they can, come and train teaching artists who are local teaching artists to do the program, and then it just can keep growing. I think that we need to build more bridges now, not to destroy the ones which exist.
Yeah. I want to pull Ali into this bit, because I'm thinking that if we think about refugee children, they're a bit like living archives of all violence or survival, everything that comes along. So in a way, how can we responsibly document their stories without, getting into a level of exploiting their trauma? And so how do you see that?
Well, first of all, it's been so nice to already kind of be hearing Irina and Colin talk about things. Um I feel that this question of archive now we kind of um the term archive actually is also pretty overused. We kind of use it in a lot of different ways to mean a lot of different things. And the idea of a living archive is is currently very much prominent in within artistic practices and spaces, because we like to think about people and bodies as archives that are living and growing and doing things. But I mean, if we kind of compare the idea of a state archive or institutional archive, which actually has been historically closed to change, closed to access, part of a certain kind of a um, almost a propaganda machinery. I think already thinking about archives in this way is a kind of shift in what then archives can mean towards a more open and a kind of accessible kind of a space, right? So I just want to kind of highlight this as a difference to say that now when we are thinking about archives, especially within the context of what archives can mean and what they can do, especially within contemporary times um, with current technologies or current practices, where the idea of archives is no longer different from the idea of libraries, for example, in its openness, in its access, in its transparencies. I think that to think about ways in which archiving as a practice may highlight affinities and intersections that create cognizance of differences, diversity, and plurality on one hand. Um, and to counter alienation, I think when Colin and Irina, you were talking about the idea of hatred, right? I think hatred also comes from this sense of alienation. So, can archives actually provide spaces for familiarization? Can the story of these individuals actually then become a kind of a reminder or a stark presentation of what are the possibilities of a future that has gone by, and of a certain kind of speculative futures that may be unfolding in front of us. Um, Practically speaking, to answer your question, I think there are uh, I think that this is maybe a space which is not entirely within the space of art, but also a space within a lot of social work and activism, or the intersections of art and activism, which I have been part of, at least in Finland, where one sees um, that certain kind of telling of narrative, of stories, of narratives, of creating platforms for um, pushing a certain kind of realities that are uncomfortable no longer is the domain of art, and that art in itself cannot do it. So it needs kind of these intersections. And I think a lot of the kind of work that we are talking about, or like SpaceBridge, for example, is a project in a sense that marries these two kind of intersections very well, right?
Can I just say that the archiving of the body in Irina's work is, as I understand it, twofold. There's both the agonizing experience of coming from a country where you are a dissident, in effect, or a child of a dissident, to another country where you're regarded as a relative of the enemy. There's a terrible angst in that, but also there's the attraction of children, the idea of childhood, which we have sentimentally embraced, but when it comes to actual children, we Western cultures are hard-nosed about being resistant to offering them a healthy, growing childhood. The budgets are starved that support them. Kids are the major victims of war. They are in New York, in the United States now, 17 states are repealing or trying to repeal their child labor laws so that kids of 12 to 17 can work in horrendous situations. We have a romance with childhood, but not an actual embrace of it. And I think Irina's work is challenging us with that, to understand the specific pain, but also the general pain that childhood endures because we, in fact, are only sentimental about it.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it. It's quite interesting. One thing which I wanted to mention, when you're talking about children and how we treat them, is that the project, like the largest inspiration for the project actually came from a child activist whose name was Samantha Smith, and strangely nobody knows about her in America, but she was like the biggest star in Soviet Union. And at the age of 10, in 1983, she wrote a letter to president, the leader of the Soviet Union, Andropov, asking him why and whether he wanted to destroy America. And he wrote her back a letter, which was published, and invited her to come to Soviet Union. This is 1993, right? This is like the middle of the Cold War. And she was the first young peace mission, activist with her parents. She flew to Soviet Union, made friends. Of course, there was like a massive media circus around her. But the thing is, she did make friends, and she called home and said, well, they actually don't want the war. They're the same people as us. And for us, when we lived in Soviet, we lived with an idea. I was born in 1976, and we grew up with the idea, of course, first of all, that there will be atomic bomb from America. But the second, that all Americans looked like aliens with like five hands, 3 heads, and so on. And so all of a sudden, there is this 10-year-old from Maine, from a tiny town in Maine, who was gorgeous, with a massive smile and black hair. I was like, how can there be an American girl, feels like an enemy and a 10-year-old girl didn't go together in one head. And then she also came and she smiled and she sang songs, and she was absolutely beautiful. And interestingly, she became the biggest star in the Soviet Union. And that really, we believe that the Cold War, she created this peace mission which helped to de-escalate the Cold War, because 3 years later, there was perestroika. But when she came back to America, people were not really interested in her peace mission. She became a big star, but they invited her to be on a Disney Channel and all kind of movies, and they just wanted to talk about her as an icon rather than about her mission. And they often think, what are we doing now to other children activists when we're talking about, Greta, Malala? But it all started from Joan of Arc. Like, she was so young. We started to listen to her, but first we burned her at the stake. So, and why we always draw our attention towards the female young activists, I think is really interesting, why we draw them into our trouble. But yeah, so it all started there, and how can we really bring her mission back now and connect the children and listen to their voices because they're so refreshing and so beautiful, and they propose the solutions which are extraordinary creative. Like Samantha Smith proposed that Ronald Reagan and Andropov exchange granddaughters for 2 weeks because surely, one would not throw a bomb on a country where their granddaughter would be living. And you think, this is brilliant. This is just brilliant. And it's so, yeah, they see things for what they are, and we've got to step back, relax, and really create the environment where they're supportive. Something what Colin is saying. Okay, they do need the education platform, the healthcare platform. We need to provide them with everything we can, so they can, so they can really create the world and bridge and create the world and take care of the world, which we did such a great job destroying. Right, we did like an excellent job. We really succeeded in this. So, yeah, we've got to embrace them and listen to them. That's what we and support them in every way we can.
Yeah, I think a bit in line with this idea of what reach these voices can have. I would like to throw another poll to our participants. So the question is really, what is the most impactful role of art in addressing refugee crisis? And is it advocacy? Is it healing and resilience, cultural preservation, or agency through expression? And I think this will speak a bit, it's kind of in line with what you just said. So maybe that's why everyone's going a bit for the advocacy at the moment. But we'll wait a bit on more answers. Because it also might be a sign of the times, right? Maybe the impact that was it Samantha Smith, that the impact she had would have been different with an era of social media and this far-reaching aspect of social media. So I don't know.
What Irina was saying about the granddaughters is, I think, it's really critical because it allows you to see advocacy as a mission, but healing and resilience as the form it takes. These are not exclusive categories. And so a la Gandhi would be the change, be the world you want, live in the world you want to create. Our advocacy has to be in a style that values children and lets people try to help people understand that their own children are like the children we're trying to support.
Yeah, I will share the results actually, and while we discuss, because that kind of shows that well, most voters went for advocacy, but also the manifestation of it, which would be then the healing and resilience, like you're saying, but also agency through expression. And I think that speaks to the work that Irina is doing, for example, right? But Ali, I think you're going to say something.
No, I was just going to say that maybe this is in a way also what I was trying to say earlier about this idea of familiarization, which is a kind of a counter to alienation and othering that we kind of are that we are encountered with on a daily basis. And this I mean, I like to talk about this politics of togetherness as opposed to like this politics of uniformity, and which in a way um uh, state institutions or state-backed integration processes, at least in Finland, are really about creating a certain kind of a uniformity of culture where integration training is about learning the culture of the country that you're going into, and in a way, almost it's an unspoken or an unsaid rule that you are expected to forget about your own culture, you know? And that's how integration training actually is designed to function, whether it's in terms of the language, whether it's in terms of cultural cultural integration, and so on and so forth. But I think when we talk about, and this is why also it's maybe also important to redefine um, the terms that we're using. So I think that when we're talking about integration through artistic and cultural practices, that it is about celebrating that kind of diversity, of that kind of plurality, of actually creating platforms of equalities and equivalences where what is needed is provided for as an equal as an exchange that can never really be equal, because what
Mm.
is uh what what I may have and what the other person requires maybe is not an equal grounding, but a kind of a nullification of privilege, even, you know. So in that sense, equivalency kind of finds a very interesting kind of a positionality within in cultural and artistic practices of integration. So yeah, but I'm kind of like I'm
Yeah.
diverting
I
into
think it,
something.
I think what you're saying is very important.
Yeah.
Mm.
The demand that people become the culture they come to is in part what leads to those who are here to resist those who are coming, because they
Mm-hmm.
have the trauma of giving up what they had. That's generationally passed through in their families.
Exactly.
To be Italian is what now? Pizza in America. You don't really have the culture, and so when you've given up so much over generations, you resist the difference that others bring to you. So it's, I think, very critical.
Yeah, and in a way, it's really tying up with what can global efforts learn from this localized community-based approaches like SpaceBridge. And one thing that I would like to bring into the conversation somehow, and because we're having conversations on war and environment, it's like it's how does environmental justice then intersect with refugee rights, and particularly the ones of children? And and I think any of you can answer to it. Maybe Irina, you can start, but
Well, we will have a massive refugees, environmental refugees coming, right? Like we know that people will start moving because of the changes in the environment. And I think that we will also be seeing them as the other. It's a really, great view, Ali, which you brought. And I think that creating work, to bridge like space bridges or any other work which uses art to will actually prepare us to respond to those climate refugees which will come, and not with no, one word was not yet mentioned, empathy, right? It's such a complicated word, but I think this is really the goal of all my work. So how can we respond to the refugees, the climate refugees and climate change with empathy rather than with fear, right? We are fearful about someone else coming into our homes. And I think that the more platforms we can create before this new wave of climate refugees to prepare for what's coming, and the more open that we can make us as hosts is absolutely vital at the moment. Because we're not yet imagining what's going to happen, right? We're all going to move somewhere to the water. That's where we're gonna go. So how can we use the time which we have right now to prepare for what's coming? I think is really important, and especially for children.
yeah. Yeah, and I think both Colin and Ali can speak to something that came up quite often in our conversations is the importance of democracy, or the democratic experiment, as Colin always refers to, but also of grassroots action. So how can these narratives, this storytelling, archiving, everything contribute to this idea of belonging, and then inspiring political and social movements to address displacement?
Well,
I
it's sorry, Ali, you go
uh,
first.
Go ahead.
What I was going to say was that in a sense, we're back into progressive politics here. And I hate to do that because um, I think there is a humane challenge that is a meta question. But it does, in terms of action, take us back into politics because we need the politics of goodwill and welfare in order for children and people on the move to experience wholesome conditions. So to build the politics for that is critical. And we've in fact been building the politics of alterity, of the fear of the other, because we're fearful of what the world brings to us at this point. But we have to really begin to challenge ourselves to separate actual scarcity from imagined scarcity. The belief in scarcity in the future is not scarcity in the present. But unless we take control of that distinction, we are going to keep having a politics of scarcity, driven mostly by the imagined scarcity, not by the actual scarcity. So we need a politics of plenty in order to be able to contest that. Otherwise, movement of people through climate change will lead to more and more war. That's the alternative we have. We either embrace each other or we kill each other.
Hmm.
Ali.
No, I was going to say something else, but maybe to continue off what Colin said, I think also one cannot then not speak about the neoliberal capitalist apparatus in this because it is what actually generates uh, this um, this this illusion of scarcity where there is in fact abundance. And that is the role of the neoliberal machinery to actually make us believe that there is scarcity, to make us believe that there is a certain kind of it's either us or them, right? And that's where this kind of mentality also of the alterity and of othering comes, that it's either us or them in a very fundamental survivalist kind of a sense, you know. And just to kind of talk about um, violence in framed in this way, that violence is a negation of need. And this is a definition that actually has been proposed by Johan Galtung, who was a Norwegian pioneer of the field of peace and conflict research, who talks about violence as a negation of needs. And these needs are basic fundamental needs, which can be categorized as either survival needs, identity needs, well-being needs, freedom needs, and environmental needs. So again, you see that, you know, all of these conversations in a way are fundamentally interconnected because any of these needs, the negation of that is violence. So for example, violation of well-being needs would be the withholding of healthcare. mm. The negation of a survival need would be either directly speaking would be assault, or indirectly speaking would be a certain kind of a systemic negation of survival. So whether it is right to home or homelessness, or for example something else, you know. And then these are also direct structural but cultural meaning, that they're so normalized within our cultural spaces that they become completely invisible, and we don't even think of these as forms of violence anymore, right? So in that sense, I mean, just kind of riffing off of what Colin said, that this is the work of the neoliberal machinery to actually make that which is violent seem like it is a certain act of benevolence. And that is the kind of time that we're living in as well, you know, which is why a certain kind of hesitance vis-a-vis the other, a certain kind of aversion towards the other, but also a certain kind of a direct, a more aggressive form of pathology towards the other, you know, instead of curiosity and a willingness to learn, a curiosity to know the unknown, right? Uh,
This is built. This is built into what you call the neoliberal structure, but and it's built into the way that's manifest is the debt economy, that
yes.
unforgiving debt, which is how all nations now are built into the geopolitical environment, means that debt is sacrosanct and human life is secondary to it. That's been built into our structure in the international monetary system. We believe that in such a profound way that the other, that is the debtor and the owner of the cash and the borrower are in fact distinct and live in different worlds. So we formed it's a form of universal bondage that we've created. And in bondage, there is clearly the master and the servant, and we've created that category, and it keeps getting replayed and replayed. I think theater here is really critical. Just to make a leap back to Irina's work, the body in public is really important. You can't have it in film. You have it in the palpable stage. The body in public means you face the other. That person who can become the other on stage is also the other to you that you embrace across that platform. And Merton once said that when words become shallow and meaningless, we revert to violence, hence the sentimentality around children. If we don't mean it, the words are just words, we end up being violent toward children. The stage allows for the body to speak and for words to have meaning. And if people watch and listen and apply their gaze to the humanity of the stage, there is a public acceptance, acknowledgement of our shared experience. Only theater, I mean, religious institutions have done that transhistorically, but in our period, theater is the opportunity to make that palpable. And so much as I love the idea of podcasts and social media and movies, I love movies, the theater is a particular place through which the body and the words can speak. It's a critical resource that we need to treasure.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. I mean, theater is really from all the art forms. We breathe the same air, right? Which is the actor and the audience. We share the space, which is so rare now, because theater is not about facts. Like there are so many performances now which I feel are more like somebody comes and speaks a lecture or reads the lecture about these are facts, this is what it is, this is what you should do, and they're very prescriptive. And that's not like theater experience is not really educational, it's emotional. Or we educate through the emotion, right? And theater has power to really do it. Interesting, Colin, when you were talking about the abundance, like I asked the American kids if they had solutions for how help refugees. And one kid who's 10 years old, right? Here is the idea. There is 95 million square feet of office space in Manhattan, which no one is using. That's 35 Empire State Buildings. Let's turn that into housing for refugees. And it's just, again, so simple. Just the math is so simple.
Yeah.
And this is a kid. And they proposed all kind of solutions, which would, I know it's more complicated than that, but it's still possible, right? There is living in New York where there is abundance of everything. What are the rules of sharing, right? How can we have the shared economy where everyone just has what they need? And I think that learning from the refugees what they need and how, and it's actually not that much. It's actually not that much. And some of that is economic and some of that is just pure human to human connection.
May I tell a quick story about I have a grandson who, he's just an ordinary 10-year-old kid. But but this is interesting. For me, it's interesting how all the institutions come together in this moment. His sister had a birthday. She's 8 years old. And he now comes home from school by himself. So he took the bus ride in New York City to go home. And he got off the bus a stop early because he remembered there was a bank on the corner where lollipops were free. And he went in to get a lollipop to bring home to his sister for her birthday. Now, that use of the bank and the lollipop for the customer, it was completely reused, totally rescripted, out of an act of generosity. For me, it's microcosmic of what's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I think many different aspects are being raised here, and it's really, and thanks for sharing also the simplicity of these actions, right? And I want to tap into something like this global interconnectedness. Like in the end, we're all like dreaming the same dreams, and in a way. And so if we think about also the future with climate refugees, and we've when we address the challenges of a future with increasing climate refugees, also, like, how do we tap into this marginalized and indigenous knowledge, and how can it help address these challenges of the future with more climate refugees? And in a way, going back into what Colin was saying, like, what are the responsibilities at a more global scale that can ensure this equitable adaptation strategies, and how we can move forward?
Yeah, I just want to say, picking up on Ali's point, careful with the words. Being careful with the words is important. I think equitable gets in the way, unless it means according to need. Right? We are not equally needy. We have different needs, and we have to be ready to meet people with their different needs. So it's a readiness to be embracing with goodwill, togetherness, as Ali says. Equitable has the echo, unfortunately, of the last 100 years of being evening out people's needs, and that's not what we should be doing. We don't want to even people out so their needs don't allow them to express themselves.
Yeah, that was tried in Soviet Union, did not go far, right? So that's not what works. But I think here, listening to what the expression of people and what the needs are for them to be who they are, and also to be who they are, and also to be, inspiring part of the community, especially when we talk about children, right? Because again, they have a ripple effect when you think about children, what they can bring into their families, their communities, and then how those communities can go into the whole societies. Is something what we should definitely invest in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking also about, Colin, your story as being a very interesting idea of, or a very interesting practice of anarchist principles, or in a sense that here, this young individual completely subverted the system. And I think we need systemic subversion of systems in order to actually think differently. And I think when Ines, when you're asking, or when you're talking about, or when we are talking about the role of children, or when you're talking about indigenous knowledges and practices, I think there is a certain kind of a hope that these kind of practices actually bring with them a certain kind of um, uh, beyond the fact that they bring a certain kind of a kind of um, a rebalance with the environment, with nature, with each other, in ways that typical traditional neoliberal or neo-colonial ideas do not. Also, I think they bring a certain kind of a freshness and a non-cynical charge to the entire thing, kind of like just going into a bank and picking up the candy, I think that is definitely what we need to explore more and talk about more, um, within the context of climate change as well, but also in the context of other things that are obviously interconnected.
And I think, like, listening to another word, aside from empathy, creativity, right? We need to figure out how to be creative, and kids are creative, and refugees are creative. When you think about how they're learning to survive in the society which is so foreign to them. It's, you know, in SpaceBridge, we had a scene which is actually hilarious. I mean, you know, a lot of what we're trying to do is actually funny, because I think we're already bombarded with so much drama that we've got to bring some humor into this in order for us to be able to process what's in front of you on stage. But we have one scene about a TV show. I'm staging this little TV show where both American and Russian kids who have been here for a year and a half are teaching newly comers how to survive as a refugee, as a young refugee in New York City. And there's the refugee kids which have been here for like 18 months already pros, and they know what to do and how to be creative. And they're staging a scene how they prepare this holiday salad in a shelter. And in New York City shelters, you cannot bring any food. And if, you know, so if the security catches you that you bring the food, they can kick you out. And, you know, this is the main fear. But still, for the holiday, for New Year's, it's a tradition to make a specific salad. So they go to the store and they pick up all the ingredients and they stuff those ingredients in their socks, underwear, hats, whatever they can to bring it through the security. And then they find what to cut it with and they create the salad. And it's just like, and that's a moment for them, right? It gives them happiness, but the creativity with which they do this or figure out how 4 kids can sleep in one bed and how to really create their living in a system which is so hostile towards them. And I think if we learn, you know, if we just open our brain to creativity is not something what you can teach, definitely, but we used to be creative, that maybe we will be able to figure out what our next steps are as the climate change is, you know, progressing, and the new wave of refugee crisis is coming. So again, just listening to the kids and seeing what creativity means and listening to refugees. You know, when we're thinking there are kids with very profound understanding of the world, and then there are refugee kids, which also come with so much trauma and they have the understanding of the world. So when those two merge together, I think that's really where the whole world explodes.
And it seems like also a way to preserve memory. And I think that's where like your work is also aligned with Ali's in terms of the archival focus, or how can these narratives of climate refugees could be preserved as living histories that then inform how we will act in the future, right?
No, sure, for sure. I'm actually also thinking of the question that you asked right in the beginning, and I kind of feel that I was not able to give a good answer, because I also feel that, I mean, if you had asked me how are perhaps refugees living archives, I would have given a very different answer. But then when you ask me uh, how may refugee children be living archives, and I feel that there is a certain kind of a hesitancy in me to kind of say that they can be representatives or signifiers or memory holders, before saying that maybe we just need to let children be children, because that is what is required, right? And so how can we learn from children? Maybe is only that, okay, maybe I can learn from children who are around me in my immediate vicinity, either my own children or children of friends or so on and so forth. But learning from children en masse or as a group means that they're overexposed, and that is not what they need, right? But then the tragedy of our times is that when we think about the idea of refugee children, it's already that they are overexposed to the brutalities of life, which in a way put them almost as witnesses and therefore testifiers of the time and the lives that they have witnessed, and therefore need to kind of be representative of. So for me, it's a bit of a complicated question. I'm not the expert on it, but definitely if you kind of want to talk about the idea of refugees as a group or immigrants as a group, beyond without kind of oversimplifying, I would say that definitely they definitely become representative of their own experiences. Maybe not the experience of an immigrant. Like, I would not say that I'm representative of the experience of an immigrant in Finland, or of a non or a non-native resident in Finland, or even a representative of what it means to be Indian in Finland, kind of a thing. But I feel that we kind of lose this idea of often we lose this idea of perhaps we can be representative only of our own immediate experiences, and maybe that which gives a certain or lends it, or those experiences that lend themselves to us in formulating us. And so, why I'm saying this, all of this, is also that culture, and this is what Ambedkar says, that culture does not just exist in communication, but culture is communication. And that we often, in trying to find answers or solutions, we stop communicating because we feel, okay, this is it, and now we have to hold on to this idea, because if we continue communicating around this idea, it will change and we no longer will have it. And, so it seems endless. So we also kind of often um, kind of fixate on certain ideas of what has already been communicated.
Can I just
Again, just
can I,
rambling, but yeah.
no, what you said is really intriguing. In a sense, rather than saying we can learn from children, I think we can say we have the opportunity to learn what we can be and give to the world through how we relate to children.
Mhm.
Exactly.
It's a lesson for us to grow
Mhm.
Yeah.
rather than for them to teach us.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
because that would be unfair on the children. But
Yeah,
Mhm.
then
yeah.
Yeah, and
the
thinking about
onus has to be on us to learn. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
thinking about what you were saying, Ali, with like the individual experience not representing also the group experience, that they are, each at its own. But I'm thinking like what also needs to be in place. One of the polls that we had prepared, I think, would go really bring an interesting perspective also from our participants. So we're asking the most what's the most pressing focus for the global refugee crisis? And I think some of these options kind of speak to what's some things that you mentioned. So one, are we talking about policy reform and legal protections of groups, of individuals? Or two, are we talking about community integration? Three, youth empowerment. And empowerment can be a tricky word, but focusing maybe on youth and giving them a voice and agency. Yes. And for climate action and environmental adaptation. So I'm interested to see like what people are thinking, kind of following what you were saying. And at the moment, I see that people are going between the first and the second option, so policy reform and legal protection, and also community integration. So it kind of feels aligned with what the topics that you brought up with your intervention. Now I can share now.
Mm.
So it's interesting in a way, like how policy reform or legal protections, right? It could be kind of, or in the most pressing focus for this global crisis, but also community integration could play a role. If any of you to comment on this.
Yeah. No, I mean, also just to, um, I feel that this line of thinking that I was proposing directly comes from what Irina was talking about, that why theater is important, that we're breathing the same air, we are face to face, the actor and the audience are sharing space. And so in that sense, just thinking about in your question of the children, kind of felt like, okay, the children directly, physically, or in some way directly connected, or present, for a lack of a better word. And thinking about also that as in a way the requirement for a kind of a anarchist exercise, that they are generally, anarchist communes are by necessity small scale. The moment you scale them up large, they become systemic, and generate more stable and therefore more ossified forms of governance, which then sees that system to be anarchist. Then it becomes republican, or it becomes governmental in or bureaucratic in different forms. So a certain kind of subversion uh, of pre-existing systems, especially bureaucratic governance systems, need for them to be kind of small scale and therefore many. And so, in that sense, I find also parallels in what you were talking about, Irina, with the idea of theater being that kind of representation of scale, also, as opposed to cinema or mass media, which do things differently but do not have this immediacy and this directness and that same spaced agency. Mm.
It raises what you just said raises a really serious challenge in the sense that undoing bureaucracy and shrinking government is so quickly a right-wing agenda.
Mm.
And that's not humane. It's not based on goodwill. It's based on greed and power hunger. And so being able to refine that challenge to the government systems is a challenge of reform and reconstruction, not not an invitation to collapse and chaos.
For sure.
And that's a line that we have to tread carefully, I think.
Yeah. I'm also aware of our time, but I think there's two things that I would like. One is that Irina, you might not know, but usually we always have throughout our conversations, Colin gifting us with one of his poems. And I'm thinking if you would want to read something now, or if you want to go first into a bit of a reflection on, I think I would be interested in having a reflection on the title, what is the most urgent question? And not so much, it's both an umbrella question and also considering specifically how the future of displaced children can shape global societies, but what is the most urgent question for each of you? I think that would be something really valuable to hear a bit of a reflection on. But we would also like to keep some time for hearing one of Colin's poems, if possible.
Sure, whatever you prefer, it's fine. I've got a poem I could read. I
Maybe
think
the
Ali's
poem first.
already cautioned us about how to answer your question, which is not to reify any answer. If we have a most important, we're probably wrong. But among the important questions is I think the way to frame that. What are among the most important questions that we can ask? And I would say, for me, what I said about desentimentalizing how we think about children and requiring action is key. I think undoing the debt economy is key, and reversing austerity is key. I don't think we're going to end up loving children. My poem is called Other People's Children. I don't think we're going to end up loving other people's children in an austerity environment. And I don't think we're going to address the climate crisis with a debt economy. So that's my take.
Well, for me, something actually which I said in the first performance You know, when Samantha Smith wrote a letter to Andropov, she said, "Why do you want to conquer the world?" And after that, she wrote, "That question you really don't need to answer, but I would really like it if you will." And that was such a great thing because, you know, in theater, and we, of course, we come from Shakespeare, and we say that great theater only poses questions and don't give any answers. But with this project, like my really biggest question is, can we experience empathy towards children who we consider the other, right? Like, or can we experience empathy towards more than one group of children? And I think that this project and working on this, I do want people to give answers at the end. You know, they don't have to answer, but I would really like if this project helps them to answer this question. So to me, it's really the question of, can we experience empathy towards youth, which comes from the aggressor country in which we're not friendly towards? Can we see them as youth? And can we experience empathy towards more than one group of people, especially if they're children?
Ali, any?
I mean, I think Colin and Irina said very good things. I feel maybe I'm curious, what would this kind of empathy towards others? I mean, in a way, it's a question that I've been kind of thinking about through, for example, Susan Sontag's book regarding the pain of others, right? I mean, this is in a way exactly the same question, except so I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, what does it mean to consider? I mean, maybe not even go as far as to have empathy, but what does it even mean to regard or have consideration for the fact that there is pain in the other and how to engage with that? But I think right now the problem with the world is that let alone having empathy, we're not even willing to engage with the fact that another person may be in pain and how to kind of engage with that. I mean, that's really the question and the issue of the world. So I feel very much in um I, I think a lot of us are in a way engaged with this kind of this question and trying to figure out how to create these spaces without them becoming platforms, because platformization is another problem, and really have meaningful engagements, even if they are like small and one-on-one. But then the fact that we need to actually have many of them, like Irina said, this project, not just in the US, but all over the world. I mean, because it's needed. So that need and that pain, I think that for me is something that I will think about.
Maybe we can hear the children of others then in following the pain of us.
It's called For Other People's Children. It's sort of an anthem poem. Other people's children, you don't know them. You don't know them, but you owe them. You can see them on the border of disorder. You can see them. Look up at the heavens. You think that's rain? You think that's rain? Think again. Think again. Other people's children, you don't know them, but you owe them. Who owns whose heartbeat? Who owns whose breath? Who owns freedom? Who owns death? Who lives in a fortress? Who's selling lives? Whose heart is broken? Who's bitten by flies? Other people's children. Other people's children. Look at the heavens. You think that's rain? Think again. Think again. Who owns their stories? Who's telling the truth? Who has the answers? Where is the proof? The truth is in people singing out loud, calling for justice for everyone's child. Look up at the heavens. You think that's rain? Think again. Think again. Other people's children? You don't know them, but you can love them. Just love them.
Thank you, Colin. That was beautiful, as always. We always have this moment, Irina, that Colin reads a poem and then we kind of need to go on without having time to process it. So thank you so much As I said, we were kind of have some time constraint also today. Irina's jumping into rehearsals with the children. So I want to thank everyone for, especially Irina, for your powerful insights on what you've been doing, the audience, and of course our speakers. There's many themes that we've been covering, from resilience to interconnectedness and action in this series. And we will share some reflections. We're planning to write something about the series, and we're also wanting to have a brief reflection with Colin and Ali about how the series has unfolded and how many different perspectives the guests have brought into it, and how this will inform what will come forward. And we encourage everyone to continue these conversations. The themes that we've been going through, from not war and environment, is such a big umbrella, and then we brought different perspectives into it by bringing different guests to the conversation. And you're welcome to see the conversations that we had before. They're all already on YouTube, the 5 previous sessions, and we'll also publish this one on YouTube. And we've posted already also 3 of the conversations on the podcast version, so you can catch up on the conversations we've had. And we encourage you also, of course, to collaborate with Artists with Evidence, to support Artists with Evidence through donations too, and to sustain future programming such as this one that we've been having. So any final comments, you're welcome before.
No, this is great. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining, Irina, and thank you, Ali and Colin. It's always a pleasure to talk with all of you. And thanks to the participants that joined. I think there's a lot of food for thought in this session. And yeah, one thing that really stuck with me was this idea of the body in public. And it feels like this is kind of the next best thing that we can have these conversations, but I think it's really great. And Irina is presenting SpaceBridge in New York in January. If you want to give some details about that, we can finalize with that.
Yeah, the project will be presented under the Radar Festival, which is the largest festival and the most important festival of new work, both national and international work in America. I will actually post the link. So if you're in New York, please come. That will be the beginning of January, from January 6th through January 11th. If kids are able to perform every day, once or twice after school, they're dealing with a lot. So if you happen to be in New York, please come. It's an amazing event, and would be lovely to see you in 3-dimensional shape and form. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thanks.
evening.
You
Thanks.
too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you.